Okay, so for this last video, it's gonna be real short and sweet. One thing that I want to do, and I feel like I owe everybody, is a little breakdown on something that I did in the last video. When I had set up for the player to take the item and then have it to set a static mesh, at that moment, I only had one weapon on the floor. But see, as of now, I have two weapons on the actual floor. So, in the case that the person needed to pick up either or weapon, and then at some point during the interaction series that I'll do, I'll go ahead and talk about how to drop these weapons also so that you can switch between them. Well, one thing that I wanted to do was inside of the blueprint, the third player blueprint, what I went ahead and did was, and I thought I had this up. I'll open it up again. What I did was I added a tag to one of the weapons on the floor, which is this one. I added a tag. You want to click on the weapon. You want to make sure the weapon is highlighted. You want to make sure the weapon itself is selected, and you want to type in tags. And then I added a tag called SW1, which is just sword one. And what I did was I created a node called actor has tags, and I connected it to a branch after the player takes the item. And then I connected the target of this to the array element that the for each loop sends out. So as the for each loop interacts with the overlapping item, it's going to check to see if the overlapping item has a tag or not. And if it does have a tag, it's going to set it in the weapon 2 location, and if it doesn't have a tag, it'll set in the weapon 1 location. So how that looks here, and this is why I said I'll add the drop a little bit later, because I'll have to go back in and out. If you go ahead and pick this sword up, they pick it up and it's in the right hand and right location. But the reason why we want to do that is sometimes certain weapons that you pick up, especially if the static mesh has a different offset, the placement of the weapon in the hand is going to be different, and that's what I was having an issue with. So to solve that is you want to go ahead and add the second weapon into the player's hand. Make sure those static mesh is set, but make sure you have the location set up differently than what the first weapon is set up, but it's also based on how the weapon should be placed in the player's hand. Now, once again, as you go to deeper mechanics, you're able to automatically have those offsets set up in the blueprint automatically once it loads into the player's hand. But for this video, I guess I keep liking the kick. As I go for this weapon now to pick it up, it automatically goes into the player's hand in the location that it needs to be, and then I can still attack with this weapon as well. Which at later times, when we start talking about the game ability system, as you pick up different weapons, each weapon might have its own combo connected to it, right? It might have its own effect connected to it. But that's as we go deeper and we implement different things. But interfaces and tags are the two things that you really want to learn, because it can make game development so easy or complex based on your tags. And in later episodes we'll go further than that. But without further ado, we want to talk about the destruction, and we'll go ahead and pick one of the swords over here now for this. We'll go ahead and pick the original sword we've been working with, and we have these items that are already here. And if you notice that these are items that actually come with the template level, and if you hit these items, they already have physics enabled, so they move out the way, the character moves them. And this one, I actually added some destruction to it, so you can see when we hit it with the sword, it actually breaks it into pieces. And it's the same thing I did with this cube over here, and the same thing I did with this basic building block and the mesh for the character. Now, let's explain why all of these meshes broke down the way that they did. Essentially, what you want to do to add anything to the field that's a destructible item is you want to first go ahead and find the mesh that you're working with. In this case, before we go with the character mesh, we'll just go ahead and add a simple shape to the field. We'll add a sphere. We'll go ahead and make this sphere a little bit bigger. And I'm just gonna make the sphere bigger now just for the sake of it, but we can make it bigger once we add it to the destructible system or the collection. And then what you want to do is you want to go to selection mode up the top, and you want to click on fracture. And then when you click on fracture, as long as you have the mesh highlighted, you want to click on new. And what new is going to do, it's going to add a destruction collection in a sense to the content drawer wherever you added at, which we're just going to add it to the base folder here. And once you do that, you're going to have on your map a destructible item. And right now it has no mesh on it that we want to use, but right now we have something that can be broken down. But in order to make it break down to pieces, we want to look at what it says fractures. So fracture allows you to set up the way you want your mesh to break down. Right now we're going to click on cluster, and if we zoom in, we can see that we have the clusters that this is going to break down to. And if we go to explode amount, nothing happens yet because first we have to click on fracture. Then once we click on fracture, we click on explode amount, we can see how this orb will fracture. So already before we change any of these functions, we can click on save, we can click on play, and then we can see automatically that the orb is moving. And it's probably because the third player character was there already. So we're gonna move it down. We're gonna move this down to the ground. We're gonna make sure it's not intersecting so it doesn't bounce. And then we're gonna play. And now we see it on the ground here. And before I pick up the sword, we have a kick. So if I go ahead and kick this now, we see it starts breaking to pieces as it rolls on the ground. But we don't want it to look like this. So what we can do now is we can delete this collection because we have it in our content drawer. But then I can bring it back to the field now. And we will now notice that the collection is much more steady. And it also has the mesh on it. And it's at its default size of 2, but it's showing at a scale of 1 here because we were able to increase its size before turning it into a collection. So now if we were to go ahead and take this and put it to 0.5, not 5, we want to put it to 0.5, we would make it a little bit smaller. And then we can put a few of these on here. We want to hold Alt, we want to move them over, and then we can press play. And then now we have all of these spears on the ground, and then we can kick them. My character's a little bit too tall to kick it, so we'll go ahead and grab one of the swords over here. We go ahead and use the animation to grab the sword. Okay, character's looking at the sword. See where the orb's at. We want to go ahead and move over there to them, and then now we want to hit them. But then we're wondering, okay, wait, I'm not getting that much of a breakdown. Not that much of an impact when a sword slashes a spear. Some of these are good, but let's say we wanted to change the parameters on that now. So what we would want to do is, let's go ahead and pick a new shape here now. Let's go for a cube, which kind of we already have here. Let's move this cube over. Let's move it over here. We're going to click on new. We're going to put it down here in cube 2. We're going to put cube 3 because I think we have 2 cubes in there. And then now we're going to go to uniform. Right, so uniform gives it a more steady cracking situation here. And then we could change the settings here to how much we actually want this thing to explode. So we'll go up to 30 here, and we'll go up to 40 here. And then we will go to fracture. Then we will check the fracture rate as it fractures. And then we will save. And now what we can do is go into the content drawer and go to the cube 3 and mess around with the settings. The more we learn about how to deal with physics and frequency and mass and gravity, the better we can get realism and procedural explosion in a sense when it comes to this particular path I'm trying to take. When you are playing a game, most of the dynamic effects you see, especially when collisions, are all scripted. The goal here is to get a more unscripted approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to mass. We're going to shoot this up to 5,000. 50,000 might be too much for this, but we'll go to 5,000. And then we're also going to make sure that gravity is unchecked. Because with gravity being unchecked, gravity is not here actually. What we'll do is we'll go back to the third person and then we'll type gravity in over here. And then we want to make sure gravity is unchecked. And what gravity does is gravity allows things to stay in position. But when we kick this cube now with the destruction, what should happen is, bam. Not much. Besides the pieces floating in the air. And that's because gravity is not enabled. So the more we interact with this cube, the more the core pieces fly apart, which can add that dynamic sense of realism and destruction. But let's take it a little bit further now. I want to get crazy. I want this thing to go super explosive once I hit it. So what I would do is go to the mass and edit it, and I would edit it to 20,000. And then I would also make the size of the cube bigger. So let's go to 2 now. We'll move it up. And then we want to add force. So believe it or not, force is calculated in the physics between the characters that you see here. So when I use this kick at this speed, it is calculating a force. When I also pick up this sword and swing the sword, it is also calculating a force. And the force from the sword is much faster based off the speed of the sword and how it's swinging. So this sword is swinging pretty fast. When I go over to the cube and hit it, the cube is going to react to that speed based off the push. So if you notice a second ago when I did the kick, the cube didn't fly away that much. Only the pieces itself flew away. But also because I changed the mass of the cube and so high, it allows the pieces to be more reactive, especially when gravity is disabled. That means each of these pieces carry more weight going forward themselves, which changes what happens as things fly through the map. So you can see the force there, and then when I hit this one, you see the force there, and that's from the sword itself. And the basis of destruction is really that.